All right, here's my question of the day. And you're going to have to forgive me because I have a squeaky chair, but it's the most comfortable chair I have, so I'll try not to squeak too much. But here's my question of the day. Why are we having the pretrial supervision discussion in the first place? And the only story I can tell you is my own story about what got me into the business of discussing pretrial supervision at all. So here we go. In 2006, not long after Hurricane Katrina, I was approached by a competitor in the bail bonds industry with a fairly desperate plea to help fight a group that had come into New Orleans for the purposes of, at the time I really didn't understand. They were sold to the city as a group that would come in and assess people. I suppose I've learned that word. I don't know if I knew it then, but they would come in and assess people that were low risk, low level, first time offenders, municipal court, traffic court, stuff like that, and they would get out and just another program. Courts have all kinds of programs. They have drug programs, they have domestic violence programs, they have reentry programs, they have all kinds of things. So it was just another one of those. Truth be told, at the time, it really wasn't hurting me, didn't bother me, because most of the business we did was in felony court. What little bit of court or business that came out of city or municipal or traffic court, those didn't get affected because they were domestic violences that were misdemeanors and misdemeanor marijuana cases, things that they had to make bond on anyway. So it really wasn't much of an effect. They were actually releasing people the same way they had been releasing them. They were just doing it under a different name. And at this point it was called the Vera Institute. So I didn't have a whole lot of, for lack of a better word, care. I really didn't care. And it was a competitor that had the problem. So, Double didn't care. I basically gave them lip service and rolled on with it and didn't care. I guess through his persistence, and I can actually say for sure, through his persistence, over time, I came to have the discussion and start to listen and learn and understand, and actually looked into the Vera Institute and started to realize that, they have much more nefarious goals. These people didn't make a lot of sense. And when you really looked at what they were providing and you tried to match it up to something that would prove that it was worth anything, you really couldn't find anything that would support their claims. To be quite simple about it, what they claim, what they actually pronounce, what they tell people, what they sell is a risk assessment instrument, a mathematical formula that is a 6-page, 12-question questionnaire that asks questions about a person. There's a video on, you can go to Vera Truth on YouTube or A2I Online on YouTube, and there's a series of videos there, and it breaks down in detail the risk assessment. And one of those videos, who is 24, who is 24, but there's many of them, and their titles pretty much clearly identify them as risk assessment videos. The thing about the risk assessment videos that you see there are a lot of Vera-based stuff, but understand this, as I've had the discussion now for years, the risk assessments generally run under a simple formula. They're mathematical equations that are proven extremely dangerous. And that's not just because of the way they rate people, but it's what Vera and CJI and PJI proclaim that you need to do with those ratings. I mean, it's okay if they, by their nature, rate somebody low, okay? And that's okay because you can identify that when you read a Vera risk assessment, low means high. But the problem is Vera goes one step farther and absolutely says you must start releasing people that are low risk, low to moderate risk. And when you see some of the numbers, in their case, it's like 6 to 8, 6 to 12, I don't remember, I have to look at the video, is low to moderate risk. And it's a crazy number because that number includes people like Ted Bundy. Locally in New Orleans, it would be Akeem Scott, Mother's Day shooter, shot 19 people at a parade. The Aurora movie theater guy. And they say, no, you don't understand. Those people are special cases. They wouldn't go through. They wouldn't get out. Hey, but that's not what the program does. The only reason they can say that with certainty is because these people made the news. You have a lot of other villainous people that should never get an assessment that would let them just roll out with no supervision. And they all fall into that gap. Think about it. If the guy that makes the paper, the most villainous guy you could ever imagine, it falls in, everybody under him won't. I mean, it's an insane way of doing business. But they they tell everybody that they can assess risk to reoffend, which future crimes. And I'm not sure exactly how, you have to see the risk assessments and actually go through them and see the questions one by one. It's not many. Like I said, it's only 12 questions. How the heck would you ever find out? How can you say that you can tell if a person's going to commit a future crime? That's crazy. The bail bonds industry itself asks way more questions. And they don't just ask them. They get family members to come in and actually sign for what they say. The Vera Institute literally has made the statement. John Wool made the statement after the Mother's Day shooter because he was called out. The Times-Picayune actually found an arrest record on this guy in Alabama just by doing a Google search. Simply Google searched his name, found that Akeem Scott had been arrested. The Vera Institute said he had never been arrested. So he got, better score. So they asked him about that. How the heck did you miss that? We got that on Google. And he said, well, when we can't confirm it, we take the defendant's word. Listen, I can tell you with certainty, the Vera Institute has no access to the NCIC computer. They have no way to run a name. So they have no way to do a background check. In fact, to give them access would be illegal. The NCIC is a federally run program. There is no jurisdiction that can just say, yeah, here's your password. That's not the way it works. You have to get into NCIC and you have to have a reason to be in NCIC. And then you only get certain levels of access depending on your password. And it's not something that you can use somebody else's password or forget, it doesn't work that way. They don't know I did it. No, you don't understand. They absolutely track the usage of NCIC and you have to follow the rules. And Vera does not in any way fit into a category that would give them the ability to run NCIC. Now, the sheriff will run it. And I'm not questioning that Vera can get the information from the sheriff. I'm questioning why would they have to pass it through a third party. Everything that the Vera Institute actually does is already done. That's another issue. It's done by the courts, by the sheriff, by the public defender, by the private attorney. It's done by the whole thing is set up in a way that you have these pillars of freedom. And the defense attorney is one of them. Okay, the judge is another pillar because he gets to actually decipher between two arguments and say, this is what I believe. And then you have a third pillar, which is the actual bond itself, the Eighth Amendment thing, that thing that's in the Constitution that New Jersey just thought that they could erase and no one will notice. You have this Eighth Amendment that says that you have to have a reasonable bail. And the point to that is, not only does the Constitution protect the public, and it has to protect the public from an offender, but it protects the defendant. It gives him the right to get out, to choose his own lawyer if he can, to use a state paid lawyer if he needs, but to get out and have representation, to maybe work, to maybe better himself and work towards solving the problem. Maybe he doesn't have to go to jail if he fixes the problem. There's a million reasons why you have to protect a person's right to get out, but you also, in doing that, have to protect the public from that person. So you have to have a wide range of choices as it relates to levels of supervision. And only one small piece of that whole scale is bail. The commercial bail, property bail, cash bail, whatever financial or liability generated form of release. It's just a small portion of it. There's much greater portions that have absolutely nothing to do with anything but your word. It's only when your word is no good or your crime exceeds, who cares what your word is. I mean, you can't do things that we don't care what you were. You were a nice guy and everybody, you always see it. He was such a nice guy. Yeah, well, then he just killed everybody in his house. So think that at that point, society has to understand that, and let's just not say he killed everybody. He was, doing bad things with kids. There's no murder. This guy still has a right to bail because there's no murder. And really, the Constitution didn't say you could take away bail for murder, but we've allowed it. And I think I accept that. But now we have a guy who's raping kids, and you're like, wow, I don't want him out. Do you get it? Add that to the list? Then what do you add next? And what do you add next? And then don't say that won't happen because New Jersey just did it. Because in the state of New Jersey, now you're either going to get released or you're going to get held. And the discretion is, and that's really, really cloudy as to really who has the discretion to decide. But at the end of the day, it's the judge, and I don't think there's much recourse for you. So you could literally be a guy from Nebraska who, maybe loose, and I don't know if Nebraska has loose gun laws or not, but if Nebraska allows their kids that like to hunt and stuff, carry their guns in their truck, and one of them forgets his magazine in the back seat and gets pulled over in New Jersey, well, he could be considered a flight risk because he's from Nebraska. So the judge can just hold him, never let him go. And don't say it won't happen. The law now allows for it, and eventually they will do it. They may not do it today because they don't want you to catch on, but hey, look, eventually they will do it. Or that maybe they haven't caught on. But sooner or later they will hold you. And they will hold people against their will on things that they should have never been able to hold them against their will on. And by removing the third pillar of freedom, that is exactly what you end up with. And that third pillar is another reason why it's important, is because without it, the only other form of freedom is government run. Completely and wholly under the government's thumb. And I don't know about the rest of society, but there's very few things the government does really well on its own. And when you can't compete with the government, when you can't provide something that the public can choose to compete with government, then you're under the government thumb. And this area is personal freedom, literal personal freedom. When you have a government that thinks it can remove the 8th Amendment, it has totally taken you and put you under the control of the government. It's not a freedom bill. It's a control bill. And it's absolutely wrong that it passed. In fact, when you read the writings, and again, on the Vera channels, we have videos that show this stuff. When you read exactly, and it's amazing because ACLU backed this stuff, and it's crazy. They literally did a trade. They said we had to surrender preventative detention to get the pretrial services in the front end. In other words, to get the social justice release mechanisms in place, they had to give up preventative detention. They wanted it to be, we want everybody to be released. You should not be held pretrial because of money, liability, whether it be money, period. And to go off in another direction real quick, they claim that they don't want money involved in their release, but yet every program they run requires money. They get paid, and they get paid huge dollars, and they upset the system so drastically that it costs enormous amounts of money. But it's all shoved off towards the end because the disaster is down the road as they get ingrained. The more and more people that they get released into the system without any responsibility at all for the person or for themselves. I mean, they don't have to, the person doesn't have to be responsible. If he doesn't go to court, who cares? It's just another run, I mean, come on. The police aren't going to come knocking on your door that day you miss court. They're going to run into you on the street somewhere. And they know you get 6 months a year. Just don't do anything stupid. You might make it a few years before you actually get caught. And every now and again, every blue moon or so, you might have a sheriff's deputy show up to knock on the door to see if you're there. But everybody knows, just don't answer the door. Tell him he's not here. Unless they have a search warrant, don't let him in. So, I mean, you can play the rope-a-dope game for so long. I mean, at one point, it just dies on a vine. They pull him over, and he gets him taken to jail. And the whole process starts over again because you can't hold him. And, and this is where America finds itself right now because these guys start advocating for smaller jails, which only reinforces their client base because it forces the jails into a position where they have to let them go because they have no room. And the only thing that's available to them are these unaccountable programs. So swinging all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, that's really where mine and my competitors' conversation started to go. Having these discussions and truly beginning to understand the nature of these groups and what they were doing, to realize that it wasn't just the Vera Institute and John Wool in New Orleans. It was so much more. Just simple history on things like Vera. I believe it actually started with good intentions. And I believe it's actually been utilized in many cases, even to this day, with good intentions. But it has recently become a social justice mechanism for change in the criminal justice system, and it's not good change. It's change from criminal justice to social justice. And I'm sorry, that's just racism. That's just truly separating society by color and just absolutely denigrating America's blacks by saying that because you're black, you're poor. That's just not true. That's absolutely not true. Look, as a person who produces bail in multiple states, I can assure you, I have jails that are 99% white people in that jail, and they're not small jails. In fact, in Louisiana alone, I can tell you that there is an enormous population of white people in the St. Tammany Parish Jail. And that is just on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain from Orleans Parish. I can assure you that there are an enormous amount of people that are white in the Jefferson Parish Jail. And again, that borders Orleans on both sides of the river. I can tell you that south of that is Plaquemines Parish, and it's the same story. The point is, it's not true that the only people held in pretrial are black and poor. It is true that people are held pretrial because they can't afford their bail. And that is absolutely the truth, and there are solutions, but it should not be social justice solutions. It needs to be criminal justice solutions. And criminal justice is based on responsibility and accountability. That is the whole point. That is the point. So why would you put any process in between that is wholly and completely unaccountable? And that is what the Vera Institute and everything like it is, to attack our criminal justice system and say that you must remove the only truly accountable form of pretrial release supervision there is the definition of insanity. First of all, you can't, because you must maintain the accused right to their own type of freedom. They must be able to be freed and be able to defend themselves. But it's not a free ride. You absolutely, based on a preponderance of evidence against you, are being judged from the moment you're arrested, whether you like it or not. It has to be done that way because it has to be fair. And a judge is required to not only follow the law as it's legislated, but also the rules of court as it's written. Every judge in America has a book called the Rules of Court. And in that book includes a set of rules on how to set a bond and what criteria to follow. And I guarantee you, in every one of those books in America, it includes the nature of the charges and the history of the defendant, or the accused. And that's exactly how it has to stay. And the Vera Institute and everybody like it in every single risk assessment in America advocates the exact opposite, to strip that out of there and not give that judge that ability, to literally remove the judge's ability to decide. And that is where commercial surety has an ability to fix this, because everything commercial surety stands for puts the decisions and the policy back with the judge. It provides every solution the judge needs. Everything. Because the commercial surety, the surety period, the liability party, the person who is liable for the release, is wholly and completely liable to the court. And the judge is the court. So if the judge has an issue with something you have or have not done, he simply brings you to court and deals with it. And there's not a whole lot you can do as long as he follows law. So in the discussions that I have with my competitor, I think the first things we started to do was communicate with, the higher leadership of our industry. It makes sense. I mean, there's lobby arms, there's media arms in our industry, and there's great programs, there's great groups. The American Bail Coalition, also known as ABC, is a great program, and it is a group of representative insurance companies, for the most part, I believe, that represent the interest of commercial surety in America through the insurance company's perspective. Then you have the PBUS, which is basically the bail agent or commercial surety agent association, and it's a nationwide association, and it includes insurance companies. They're members of it, and obviously they advocate for exactly what we're talking about today: accountable pretrial release, obviously. And they work hard. They do a great job. They're very active in the legislative systems of each state and nationwide, and their fight hasn't gotten easier, it's gotten harder. They're working harder every day, both groups. And they have a very, very important job ahead of them as it relates to legislating in each state and now nationally, with what we've seen with the attacks on money bail as it's been defined in each of these states like Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and such, and these groups like PJI and Equal Justice Under Law and their proclamations of success at defending the Constitution, when the truth is all they're doing is suing little tiny itty bitty towns that they don't even have a dog in this fight. What they're suing them for is what they're already doing, and it's just a whole bunch of silliness and a waste of time. And if the county wants to stand up and have a fight, they're just going to spend money on something they already do, and it makes absolutely no sense. So it's really easy to sign it. And what they don't only sign it, but they say, look, we agree with this completely, but of course you have to follow state law. And an example of that is Louisiana, where they sue to say that you got to let all these first-time, low-risk, low-level misdemeanor, yada, yada, yada offenders go. Well, of course, they already do that, except where law says you can't. And you can have misdemeanor violence charges that you can't. You have to be released for supervision. And there's obviously options the judge has as it relates to supervision. Just doesn't have to be a bond, but there is supervision requirements. So the only thing they can't concede is what is already codified against it at the state level. Because these aren't federal lawsuits, they're suing them locally. And it's just silly, it's stupid what they're doing, and it's just it's smoke and mirrors, and it's a distraction. And they use it as something they can run up their flagpole as these constitutional successes. But when they're ever exposed completely, they're exposed for the fraud they are. They're nothing. They're just smoke and mirrors. But they do this professionally, and they do it intentionally, and they do it to distract and mislead and keep you off track. And it was described to me in one post in a debate as whack-a-mole, and that is so absolutely correct. And it is a silly game, and it's easy to get away from. First of all, quit caring about the Vera Institute. And that was something that we learned quickly. We had meetings with the American Bail Coalition. We had discussions with PBUS. We had discussions with our local association. And unfortunately, at the time, 10 years ago, it wasn't as big an issue as it is today. And without throwing stones, the truth is just the truth. We didn't get a lot of support because it really wasn't a big issue. It was a local issue. And they wanted to support. They tried to support. But you know, the truth is, I think that was for the better. If we would have got the support, we would have just stayed a bunch of different people fighting the same cause with other people doing it for us. And I don't think that was the best approach, because ultimately, at the end of the day, in New Orleans itself, you have basically, and I'm gonna name them. I'm gonna name their companies because they're great people. Blair's Bail Bonds, Number One Bail Bonds. Damn it, Derek, I forgot your bail bonds company's number. I'm sorry. Your name. Steve's Bail Bonds. ABAC Bonding. Yeah, every single bail bonds company in the city of New Orleans that worked in concert together. I mean, you had bail bonds of Metairie. You had affordable bail bonds from both Gretna and from St. Tammany Parish. Obviously, Number One Bail Bonds was both from New Orleans and Jefferson Parish. Actually, I think Affordable was too, from Jefferson Parish. So you have all of these companies that are absolute competitors against each other all over the greater metropolitan area. And they literally came together and they sat down and they had conversation. And it worked. And it worked because we had more. Not because we got anything done. We had more conversation. And they kept having conversation and basically refined the conversation to a message. And the message has turned into a discussion. And I say a discussion because there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. We absolutely have to ask questions because they can't answer the questions. And the best question to answer any unaccountable form of release, and unaccountable forms of release isn't just Vera and CJ and PJ, it's these private probation companies. It's these unaccountable GPS vendors that are giving them to sheriffs. These guys are diverting what should be bonds to that form of supervision. I believe that if you don't have the power to arrest, you should not have the power to put a bracelet on somebody. The commercial bail bonds industry is the right place for GPS. If the court needs help in that area, it should come from the bail bonds industry, because the bail bonds industry is the one group of people who is accountable completely already without it. And all this does is actually provide a solution that the courts can rely on, and it pretty much becomes the virtual jail capacity that has been stripped away by all of these groups that have come in and been activists for the destruction of the criminal justice system in the first place. So the biggest question we've had from our discussions, or what's come from our discussions, is what happens when you're wrong? With any unaccountable form of release there is nothing. There's nothing that happens when they're wrong. What can happen? I mean, they simply fold back to the pre-existing system, the criminal justice system as it was. Now remember, they activate for, they advocate for not being able to hold people pre-trial on misdemeanors at all. But they also advocate for not being able to hold people who haven't paid their fines. And that just came out. Attorney Lynch released a document all over the country to all of the criminal justice system that said you will quit doing that. We basically will see that as a violation of a person's civil rights if you dare to hold them because they refuse to pay their fine. First, you have to prove that they weren't able to pay it in the first place, or that they were able to pay it. I mean, it basically puts a burden back on the state to prove that they're not poor. And it's an absolutely ridiculous position to have. The bottom line is the criminal justice system is a accountability-based program. And at the end of the day, even at the lowest level of crime, there is a price to pay. And in most instances, it is money in the form of a fine or a fee. Now, I'm not arguing that the courts don't have enormous fees. I do find it ironic that they complain about ours, these groups, to the courts, and the courts tend to agree. But I don't think the courts agree so much that we charge money, or that it even costs, in many cases, in some cases, a lot to get out of jail through a bond. I think the courts argue that maybe they don't have any other solutions. And when there's no solution to a capacity problem, whether the capacity problem is logical or not, and I think in a city like New Orleans, pre-Katrina, 7,000 beds is what they had. Probably not necessary. I would think that was pretty big. It was its own little industry. But they've been operating since then, anywhere from 2,500 to 3,500. I think that 2,500, where they were at for quite a while, was, illogically deflated. They didn't need, they held it down there. They suppressed the population, trying to prove that they could get to what became the decision of the federal court in the consent decree, a 1,400 bed jail. So they go from 7,000 to 1,400 by basically lawsuit. Okay, and it's a lawsuit brought by activists who end up by their actions and by the consent decree instituting a policy that brings in this pretrial service group. So our discussion has always been about accountability from the beginning. It's always been about, what is bail's basic fundamental argument every time it speaks to anybody that will listen. We do it without taxpayer money. We return them when they fail to show up. I mean, aren't those two basic functions of commercial bail the foundation of responsibility in the first place? But that conversation's not good enough anymore. Nobody's listening because it really doesn't do anything to solve the problem the court has. At the beginning of this video, I showed you a puzzle. And then I know the videos then go on to just a title screen, but I try to put something at the very beginning, and in this one I put the puzzle. And I put that puzzle there for a reason. I know it's confusing to a lot of bonding companies and surety companies because they're not in that puzzle. See, in the jails in America, and again, these are numbers that are proclaimed by the Vera Institute, CJI, PJI, and all of these activist groups that are doing what they can to destroy accountability. They all say, and they're pretty accurate, that about 66% of the population that has a bond, about 66% of the population in America's jails are people that have a bond. And I'm saying jails, not prisons. Prisons are people that are doing sentences. But in America's jails, county jails, city jails, they're there before their trial. And it's 66% of the people in that jail are there before their trial, and they have bonds. They can get out of jail if they post a bond. Those people are not the people that have already posted bond. Those people came in and got out. That's not what's staying in the jail. What's staying in the jail is basically four groups of people, or, if you look at the puzzle, it breaks it down. 1/3 of it is people that they can't get out. They're probation, parole, they're really bad guys, okay? And people with murder and other things that would have no bond, or other reasons that there is no bail, no bond, no ability to get out, because bond's not just money. Bond can just be a promise, but it's a written promise, okay? So those people can't get out because there is no purpose, no way, no means, no bond. And the ones that have bonded out, they're not in the puzzle. They're out. We're talking about the people that have not bonded out and can bond out. And that capacity, not completely accurate over every little tiny city, but as a national average, it's a really close, accurate number. 60%, 66%, 2/3. It depends on who's speaking for PJI or CJI or VERA. And the numbers actually kind of seem to ring true from even a lot of the stuff the feds have had to say. So 66% of the jail's population is people with bonds that can't get out of jail. They could bond out, but they can't because they can't afford it. But this is where unaccountable says it's because they're poor. That's not true. That's not at all true. We're not even talking about people with $100,000 bonds. You can have people with $30,000 bonds. Maybe nobody in their family trusts them anymore. Maybe they've been around this block too many times and they're sick of signing for them because every time they sign for them, it turns ugly. Guy doesn't go to court, everybody's got to find him, police keep coming to the house, the bondsmen keep coming to the house, so the family won't sign. These people, they can't get out, they're stuck. In many cases, in cities like New Orleans, prostitution is a hard bond to write because these girls are generally transient. Your local drug addict prostitute is different than the majority of the prostitutes going to jail in New Orleans. Yes, they're there, but you can tell them apart from the ones that aren't. So in many cases, prostitutes get stuck in jail because they're not worth the risk. They move too quick, and if they disappear on you, and in a lot of times the charges are misdemeanors, and the bonds may only be $5,000, okay? But they're stuck because you can't do the bond. It's too much risk. People, illegal aliens, undocumented interest, whatever floats your boat, but the people that are here that aren't supposed to be here because they didn't follow the rules, those people can't get out. They're stuck because they're high risk. And again, in Louisiana, if a person is arrested and then taken and bonded out, and then immigration picks them up and deports them, that is not an excuse to not pay the bond. So the bondsman has a liability that he has to pay. And the bondsmen they don't want to do that. That's just silly. That's not how you run a business. So the bondsman can't help them. And we can go on and on. There are people, and these people don't necessarily have big bonds. It might be $5,000, it might be $10,000, and people say, oh, that's a lot. Okay, if you don't know bail, then that sounds like a lot, but you pay a premium, and it's a percentage. And in most states, it's generally 10%. And then what you find is it's still 10%, but you have added fees that the state put on. See, the state's taxing that bond. And I'm going to tell you again, in New Orleans, Louisiana, they 10% of the face value of the bond, a $10,000 bond, you pay $1,000, $1,000 to the bondsman, but then you also pay $300 to the state. See, and it's a good joke because they're the highest paid bondsmen in the city. They make more than the agents in the office most cases. The GAs, the general agents, the people that own the office, they probably don't make that, but they make a piece off of every bond. Okay, but it's still not that because so does the court. Not just every bond you write, but every bond everybody writes. So they're like mafia bosses in the bail bonds industry. They are the top paid people in the bail bonds industry, even higher than the insurance companies in most cases. Because most premium payments from the general agent to the insurance company are what, a point? I mean, it's just a small amount. But the courts take their own $300 on a $10,000 bond. And that $1,000 that the bondsman took gets divided a number of ways. So everybody, the agent that wrote it might get $100 or $200 or depending on his contract, $300, $400. The general agent gets to keep the rest and it pays premium. His premium might be a point. So I mean, take that thing apart. The courts get well paid to write bonds. And at the end of the day, it's the only process that's accountable because from the minute that bond is written, it's a legal instrument of liability, and it goes to the court, and the court has codified rule that it has to follow as it relates to holding that bond accountable for the agreement to make this defendant appear in court. If he doesn't appear in court, he goes back to jail. But when a guy has a bond that he can't afford, or when a guy has a bond that no one will do for whatever the reason, family doesn't want to deal with it, one of those charges that bondsmen don't like to do because they're high risk, these people clog the system, and there's a lot of them in there. Of that 66%, I'd like to know what that real number is of what are those people. But they're not all poor people stuck. You got also people, a big chunk of that group of 66% stuck in jail with bonds that haven't already bonded out, or people that you don't ever want to see get out, but they have bonds because the Constitution says you have to give them a bond, and we have to protect that. So it makes sense to protect that by making the guy's bond, the Mother's Day shooter, $19 million. Yeah, he's definitely too poor to afford that. Most people in America are. So the point is, it's set in a way that he can't ever get out. And there's a lot of those in there. The average 17, 18, 19-year-old that does his very first armed robbery, with the preponderance of evidence that say it's true, which means they found probable cause, that bond is generally going to get set at $150,000. When you see that there's, risk, there's a little bit of leeway on the evidence, you might see it be as low as $50,000, maybe $25,000. 10% of that, just to use easy numbers, you're talking anywhere from $2,500 to $15,000 to get out of jail. The guy, the kid was working. He might even had a good job. Maybe he was, stocking for Walmart at night at the distribution center somewhere. Making $15 an hour or $16 an hour, doing okay. He can't afford that. Okay. Whether he's guilty or not is irrelevant at this point. The discussion is, should he get out? Some would argue you set a bond, so that means you think he should get out. You could interpret it that way. In many cases, that is exactly what we would like to see. But at the same time, we do respect the fact that that might be dangerous. So could we let him out with some form of supervision? Could we increase the supervision some way? And I think that's where the problem is with the 66%. That's not the conversation being had. The conversation is, okay, they got to go. What do you rate him? You rate him a 3? Great, get out of here. So when you see this guy getting rolled out anyway on his own, and you wonder why your violence is increasing in these cities, because you're teaching these guys there's zero retribution. You cannot be dealt with if you just ignore it. And then you build this system that turns into a system where you only hold the accountable. And that's just silly. People that are absolutely responsible get stuck paying the tab for everybody else to a point where you implode. You literally, what does this guy care if you lose his license? He can't drive. He can't get a fishing license. Can't vote. He doesn't do any of that stuff anyway. Maybe he drives, but he probably never got a license in the first place. Maybe he did. But if he loses it, so what? At least he's not in jail. He's not paying the thousands of dollars in fines and fees that the court doesn't have a problem collecting. You have to have an accountable system in place if you want to handle that 66% in any type of efficient form. And there currently isn't one offered. Bail isn't addressing those people because bail is in a position where it's always been. It's, well, I didn't know they needed help. So it's not a bad thing. It's not like bail's doing something wrong. We just don't understand what the argument is. And we've learned this argument by having the discussion. And it came about because a lot of people that would normally never sit down together and have real discussion did. And they did it a lot, and they did it for a long time. And I've learned to become good friends with my competitors. And I don't have a problem saying, no, I'm sorry, his office is over there. Because I know he does the same for me. Look, there's still a good old competition. We're competitors. But you know what? We really do it in a way, when it really comes down to it, and it's time to help the other guy, we do. When a bondsman in New Orleans goes out and catches a particularly bad person that really is a jerk and can't be dealt with under any circumstances, there's no way to help. We want to make sure the court knows that, and we let everybody else know it. And look, if you want to write it, but we're telling you as a friend, this is the trouble we had, and this is what we recommend. And in more cases than not, everybody ends up responding back, thanks, I appreciate that. And because we do it together. And people know it's not a game anymore. We're not playing games with each other. Will it last? Will this relationship last? I don't know. The good thing is historically in every city in America, the real bondsmen have been around a long time. And they stay around a long time. And the reason is, in most bail bonds companies in America, they're family run. They're not big corporations. They're not big industries. Even if they cross state lines, it's usually family and very close friends that are working in these businesses together because it's the best way to do them. It works. The pretrial supervision discussion is a discussion about questions. It's about asking questions. What happens when you're wrong? Do you return them to court? How do you return them to court? The bail bonds industry has to understand that at the end of the day, the problem isn't with what we're doing. And everybody agrees that what we do is great. The problem is there's an enormous sector of people in jail that are stuck there because they can't afford their bonds. And that is 100% true. And that has opened a door through depressing capacities in the jail by making these jails shrink. It has brought these groups into play where they can come in and say, we have that solution. Now, maybe if they would, and this is how they present it, by the way, that they would refer that to better decision-making processes through a risk assessment instrument that will better determine a person's true risk. And maybe the bond can get lowered and the bondsman can do the bond then. And he literally come to the bail bonds company and say, hey, this is what we're going to do for you. We're going to do this for you. We're going to get these bonds lowered so you can write them. You know, on the surface, that sounds good. And in some cases, especially in the early days, that's exactly what they do, because that's what the court interprets them to be doing. They see them as, okay, you think this poor kid doesn't need the $150,000 because mom and grandma are here. We get it. The armed robbery that he's accused of, it's been accepted. The DA has definitely handed down the bill of information, so it's in a division. He's going to trial. So all right, we'll agree with you with your risk assessment. We'll make it $50,000, and then bam, bondsman does the bond, and now there's real supervision in play, and Vera gets taxpayer money, and they didn't do anything except advocate for a lower bond. And you know what? If they did that, and that's all they did, it's actually not a bad thing, but that's not what they're after, and that's not what they're doing. They do that, but they also go farther and say that the people that we are getting out shouldn't be getting out through us either, because No Money Bail Act 2016, Representative Ted Lieu out of the 33rd District in California, with, you know, Color of Change, ACLU, PGI, Vera, all these supporters, other senators and such supporting it, all based on this understanding that the only reason people are in jail pretrial is because they're poor. Eliminate money bail altogether. Let us just say, okay, of that 66%, all of you guys go home. You don't have any bail anymore. You can't get out. So the group that they just took, which one's worse? Which one's worse? Them turning a group of people out with no supervision whatsoever, or them stripping away the constitutional right to a bond in the first place? Because look, if you didn't kill anybody, you should still have that right to a bond, because technically the Constitution says you should have that right to a bond, period. But we've allowed the exception of murder, and in some cases, you know, different levels of juvenile rape can actually be held without bonds. Louisiana is one of those. Basically, a lot of them define them as capital cases, or no bail holds. And I think that's an exception that everybody in America can agree with. But when you start to just remove the need for an exception in the first place, you have a big problem. And that's, again, New Jersey. Chris Christie. This conversation, this argument has absolutely no party affiliation whatsoever. It is a partyless problem. And the good thing is it's a partyless solution, because it provides solutions for everybody across the board when the commercial surety gets involved in taking care of that 66% that's stuck in jail pretrial with bonds they can't afford. Again, not because they're poor, but because of their charges and their history. Okay? And it's by a decision made by a judge. And in many cases, they've kind of tried to set policy so you don't get these crazy judges going off the rails with stuff. They do what's in many cases called a schedule. But the schedule has more to do with keeping judges on the rails than it does to actually schedule a bond, because the judges can still use their discretion. That's the good thing about being a judge. It's up to you. That's why you're the judge. They call you a judge. It's not a judge with an opinion. And a secondary opinion is a judge. Okay, I don't like that ruling. I'm going to go see another judge. Yeah, well, that's called an appeal. Okay, so this is what we have in America. We have 66% of the population stuck pretrial with no bond. I mean, with a bond they can't afford because there are charges in their history, and a court and a criminal justice system that's under attack for capacity. So they need a solution on how to let those people go. The American Commercial Surety Agent has left that field alone and not entered it, and that has caused unaccountable solutions to come in, and those solutions by their nature are attempting to take out the part that we do to do what we do take care of, what we do handle. And to stop them, you have to provide the solution to the 66%. So why would anybody do it with you? They already got somebody doing it. Why change? Well, it's easy. We're accountable. So bring our level of accountability to them. What do we have to bring to them? And in New Orleans, we had that conversation. And, the courts, they don't have a say. It's the city council, it's the mayor, it's the legislative branch, it's the executive branch, imposing their will on the judicial branch by hiring and funding, but through the taxpayer, by the way, by stripping money away from the criminal justice system as it stands. Stripping money away from the public defender, stripping money away from the clerk of court, stripping money away from the criminal court, from the municipal court, from the traffic court, telling them to get fewer judges, and then fund these groups with this money they stripped away. And these groups' job is to sit over the judge's shoulder and go, oh yeah, that's what we think you should do. And then look, and this is, you say, well, the judge will ignore them. These people, and again, go to the YouTube channel. There are videos there. They literally say it's unconstitutional for the judge to order back into high school. Unconstitutional for a judge to order into treatment. Unconstitutional for the judge to do anything other than just sit there and wait for Vera to tell him what to do, basically. And then Vera, in the same microphone, just a few paragraphs later, will say, but we, Vera, will do that for you. We will do that. You will send them to our pretrial services program. And in New Orleans, they touted this grant-funded pretrial supervision program, which would let them supervise release, bring accountability. Things like making them call us. But at the end of the day, what happens when you're wrong? What happens when they don't call? What happens when they don't do anything? Oh, that's not going to happen because we have a 98% success rate. That's what the Vera Institute claims in New Orleans, claimed. And they were accurate. They did have a 98% success rate of the ones they didn't kick out of the program and for arraignments, because they never give you the number after arraignment. And they always exclude the people that they kicked out before they reported. And it doesn't matter. You can go to arraignment, right? And that's all great, fine and dandy. That number includes itself. But if they miss a court date, what they do is they go in on that court date and say, well, he's not here, so we're withdrawing him from our program. So he's kicked out in his in absentia. He's kicked out of the program, and then he doesn't factor into a failure rate because he's not in the program. He got kicked out before they actually issued the warrant, so they say, no, he wasn't wanted. He didn't miss yet. He didn't miss till the court ruled he missed. So we want off because he's not here. Then the court rules he misses, and that's not a number in their failure rate. That's a failure rate we will never know because we don't know who the hell they've assessed until we audit their risk assessments. The minute we audit their risk assessment instruments in 3 states, New York, New Orleans, three places, New York, New Orleans, and Oklahoma City. Why those 3? New York, because that's their home, New Orleans, because they've been here 10 years, and Oklahoma City, because they're new. The greatest amount of data will come out of New Orleans, but the message sent by hitting them in all 3 places would be priceless. By absolutely blasting them in all 3 places with a lawsuit, which is, by the way, their tactic. Sue them for the risk assessment. Sue them for the names and the dates and the scores of the people assessed. And come after a couple of things. One, what was the assessment score? And what would it have been if it was true? Because I guarantee it's not going to be accurate. You're also going to see their expulsion rate. You'll be able to see who was assessed. And then because you can pull up the dockets in most courts online, who got expelled prematurely, and then see if that reflects in any number anywhere. Then you can also check failure to appear rates, true failure to appear rates. Because remember, they're going to assess them. If they do miss court and they're not expelled, because you'll collect that number then. But what happens if they do keep going through? What if they get a court date and they miss another one? If you look at Dr. Robert Morris's study from the University of Texas in Dallas, he says that it costs roughly $1,776 per failure to appear. that number changes depending on what court we're talking about, because there's different costs of living and such, but it's a good number to go by. I'm going to tell you, we could really get a good number on their savings, because remember, they're hired to do these risk assessments, but what they use for their success is, we saved you $1.2 million and 40,000 incarceration days this year. So in other words, we had you incarcerate fewer people, which saved you this much money. So we're not going to, their goal is to have fewer people in jail because it costs less. But it doesn't address one thing at all about the criminal justice system other than that. It doesn't tell you at all what they did with these people. Where did they go? How did they act? Did they perform properly? Did you do anything that helped them? Did you just cost them more money? Is that all it was? I mean, because this proclamation by Vera and such that they should be no money bail is just misleading, because the truth is, they not only get taxpayer money, but they get offender money. Because anybody that goes into these pretrial services programs that are there to save the money because it's not fair that they have to pay, these very same programs collect fees from the defendants. Oh, and the taxpayer. So they're going to replace a wholly and completely defendant-based pay system, a wholly and completely accountable system, with a wholly unaccountable system that's paid for by the taxpayer and the defendant. And then tell everybody that it's in the best interest of the defendant, who now is under only government rule, by the way, with no other options, no freedom to choose his own form of release. And that's the solution they've provided. And bail, in its confusion, has missed the fact that this is really simple to solve. Fix the 66%. And that's what we did in New Orleans. And in so doing, was invited to come to other places and assist there, and was successful in providing those solutions there. What we discovered in this discussion is unaccountable pretrial release is the best way to describe what we're fighting, because it's not just Vera. You can't call it Vera, because it's not just nonprofit groups coming in getting these deals. Look, we have GPS companies, and they're not coming in after bail. They don't even think of bail. In fact, they would love to work with bail. They want to work with everybody. They're all inclusive. But these GPS companies come in, they're asked to bring sheriff's programs in to monitor people released pretrial in a sheriff's program. Sheriffs hate these programs. These programs pay the sheriff a fraction of what he would get if he had him in a jail, number one. Number two, it just raises his level of responsibility through the roof, because he no longer has any control over this guy, and he's going to be held accountable for anything this guy does wrong outside that jail, only because he's wearing a monitor. What the heck does that have to do with anything? How is a monitor going to make a guy not commit a crime? That's the guy's brain doing that, fellas. That's not the ankle. That's not some electronic. It doesn't take over their brain. It just tells us where he's at. So how do you hold a judge accountable for something that he has no, how do you hold anybody accountable for something he has no control over? No responsibility. But I think a lot of these sheriffs assume that responsibility simply because most of these programs, again, are an intrusion by the executive and legislative branches into the judicial branch. They legislate these dang programs in and fund them. And they're not well thought out. They're very poorly executed, and they don't fit. I mean, I'm sorry, in a city like New Orleans, how does a court, how does a policeman, woman, respond to a low battery? Now, you understand a low battery. Batteries die. Lose battery, lose the device, lose the defendant. When he has a backlog, New Orleans just recently released a 73-minute backlog, and apparently they've got it down to 30 minutes. So, I mean, guys, what's more important? A real call or a battery call? And they don't have any way to put these calls, these alarms, into the police systems. So by assuming so much responsibility over these programs, they're just shooting themselves in the foot left and right, left and right, left and right, and they hate them. And they want them gone quicker than they come in. So, but these groups, so in a lot of places the solution becomes for-profit, what they call probation companies, which is basically guys who get ankle monitors, and the judge sets a bond and says, you got to wear a device, and the guy goes across the street and puts a device on. and then, pays his bond, goes across the street, puts his device on. There's no connection to the bondsman. It has nothing to do with the bondsman. And these programs are very, very expensive and very hard to deal with because it doesn't, by not having it with bail, it doesn't bring in the common sense that, hey, look, we're going to increase this security this way. Let's help this guy that's stuck in the 66%. Let's not just throw him on everybody. If he's just going to get on a bail, do it. If you want him on a bracelet, fine. Let the bondsman do it. Because the bondsman is the guy who has the most interest in this anyway. I mean, as a bondsman for 24 years, I find it very valuable to know if a guy I have on bond is being a jerk, because they tend to do things that I don't want them to do, like miss court. And if I could get involved ahead of time, and if if it meant helping the court by providing a solution, even though I'm going to work a little more, at the end of the day, the court's going to realize that we are the solution. The other group is going to go away, and we're going to end up helping with 66% of the population we weren't helping in the first place. So I'm actually going to do better. I'm going to make more bail, and it's going to be secure bail. So in New Orleans, we grouped together and we created a relationship that now has the bail agent on the street providing the maximum level of security possible to the court as it relates to the people stuck pre-trial because their bonds are too high. The courts can literally make the decision to lower a bond and increase the security. And these people weren't coming out on bail. So now they are. Solving the overcrowding problem by creating a virtual jail and giving the GPS company a solid leg to stand on, by giving the court a solid leg to stand on, by giving the surety agents a solid leg to stand on, by getting or ejecting completely and wholly unaccountable pretrial third parties. Because what it does, now the people that really do need to get out without a bond, without anything but their work, they're gone. They're already gone. The ones that already bonded out because that's all they needed was a bond, they're gone. And now we can focus our attention on the 66%. The 2/3 of that jail that are stuck there pre-trial because they have no other way to get out. And that's what we did in New Orleans. We became the solution. We simply became the solution. And I think the second question, and we're not supposed to do two, but I have to say the second question is, well, how do I get to the judge? And that is the key. This has always been for the judge, because it is the judge who needs this. The judge needs these options. They need these solutions, and then they can be the solution for everybody else. They can definitely order these people released, and that provides a solution to the overcrowding. So the question is, how do I get to the judge? And that question is easy to answer. Do your job. When you go out and pick a person up, maybe think of a second about surrendering them. If we want to be the solution to overcrowding, why put them back in jail? And a lot of times bondsmen already are that solution by just helping get new court dates. In New Orleans, if 80% of the people that are picked up on bond forfeitures, failure to appears, get new court dates. They're taken to the court by the bondsman. But instead of just doing that, how about we start to increase security when you don't do right? How about if you miss court, we put you on a bracelet for 30 days and use it as a corrective action. It also gives you a map of your defendant's to-dos. So even if he does skip again, you can go back to this map. Look, he's still going to get his coffee in the same place, his cigarettes in the same place. He can move, but he's only going to move maybe around the corner or over on the next block. But he's still going to use everything else he was using the same. The girlfriend might be the same. There's so many things that you can find out in a 30-day track. If the guy did wrong, punish him with 30 days extra supervision. If he does wrong again, make it 90, make it until the end of the court case. But you use it as a tool, and the judge will recognize that. The judge will see what you're doing because the judge will absolutely ask you about it. And it's a wonderful position to be in, because the judge will say, you will have a conversation with the judge one day, and he will say, tell me why I can't make you take that bracelet off. And that's a simple answer. Well, Judge, Your Honor, it's not a condition of court. This is a condition of bond. I put this on him. And as the bondsman, I have the ability to put conditions on releases. And in fact, the defendant, the accused, signs for that, Your Honor, as does the indemnitor. The defendant signs and agrees to these conditions. By bringing it through the bail bonds company, you absolutely give the judge cover. He can absolutely, at the other end of it, that leads to the other end of it, by the way, because we're still talking about doing your job. Just simply go in, do it on the people you would normally consider risk. Remember the guy that was stuck in jail because his family's sick of him? And every time you get him out, you got to chase him down? Hey, here's a solution to that. Remember the prostitute? Here's a solution to that. Believe it or not, remember the illegal alien? Undocumented undocumented immigrant? There's your solution. At the end of the day, the bail bonds company has a solution sitting right in front of them. They just don't understand what they have to solve. And the minute they start to understand what they have to solve, the problem goes away. One key thing, it's never going to happen if the bondsmen are at each other's throats. It's never going to happen if the associations and the bonding companies are at each other. And it doesn't have to be done in a way that has things, money and all that going everywhere. Focus our attention. Let the PBUS and the American Bail Coalition continue to do what they're doing best. Lobby that legislature. Keep these people from destroying the only truly accountable form of pretrial release arrest. Keep these people from over-regulating us to a point where we can't do our jobs. Keep these people from stealing as much money as they can from the taxpayer through us. Stop raising these fees and then complaining about the cost of the bond. You guys are creating, in New Orleans, $300 for every $10,000 bond goes to the state. And they complain about our fees, and they're the ones that make the most. And that's very similar all over the country. I understand that not everybody listening to this is a bondsman, so I try to not just keep it to where only bondsmen understand what I'm saying. So if you're a bondsman, I know I'm boring you sometimes, but sorry. When the bail bonds industry starts to provide the solutions the court needs, the Beer Institute, PJI, their message, they get drowned out. And they don't get drowned out by us yelling and screaming and lying and misleading and misdirecting. They get drowned out by truth. They get drowned out by accountability, by responsibility. The defendant absolutely 100% takes part in this entire process because the bondsman has the ability to respond immediately. And look, these guys, they're not going to play with the bondsman. It's a whole different ball. It's a whole different ball game. When you're out of jail and your bondsman says, hey dude, you're screwing up. Because they will come to your house over and over and over again. They will focus on you. It's like an OCD problem. Sheriff's Department, you're just another person. To the bondsman, you're a liability. Huge difference. And then when we start to talk about the responsibilities and the benefits of the bail industry, everybody hears it. Because we became a solution, not just an industry. It's time for the bail bonds industry to stop being an industry and start to become a solution. That is what the pretrial supervision discussion is all about.